Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Cassidy, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today and for your service. I'm going to talk a little bit about coordinating with non-traditional partners, particularly as it relates to natural disasters, because in 2020, the wildfire season was incredibly devastating, burning more than 10 million acres nationally and hundreds of thousands of acres in my home state of Nevada. As communities continue to recover from COVID and natural disasters like wildfires, we have to provide the support and the investments to prevent further catastrophes. So for wildfires in Nevada, various stakeholders coordinate response and recovery efforts. They include our federal land management agencies, state and local governments, first responders. And one of the report's recommendations is to expand the inclusion of non-traditional partners when responding to incidents. In Nevada, farmers, ranchers, conservation groups, well, they play a key role in defending against wildfire and recovering the lands after, but they're not always brought to the table. So, Mr. Fugate, how can FEMA and the federal government expand outreach to these kind of non-traditional partners, encourage the kind of collaboration we need, particularly for us in Nevada, the West Coast, we have wildfires, but other natural disaster responses even more broadly?
Well, Senator, this is something I came to the conclusion a long time ago that government-centric problem solving doesn't scale up the bigger the disaster is. And we developed the term whole of the community and looked at the public as a resource and not a liability. How do you bring in those non-traditional folks that are on the ground that are going to take action anyway? And there's a bias in the federal government not to engage outside those partnerships. And I think at FEMA, we just had to make the disasters big enough to break the system to force people into those relationships. So I think, again, as we talk about the pandemic and we saw how that introduced new partners, it is a bias that the federal government has to get through, is that you don't have to always be the traditional organization. You don't have to have the incident command certification. We spend a lot of time talking about credentialing. But in a disaster, it's who's going to show up and work that we need to be looking at. So I think part of this is lower the barriers to the public and to those non-traditional folks to be part of the team.
Yeah, I agree. And could you speak to the, I would think that there might be potential cost savings and really proactive efficiencies when you strengthen these relationships. For example, farmers and ranchers, they could be doing things ahead of time to mitigate. Of course, in the case of wildfires, you can do some mitigation, maybe other things not so much, but do you think there's cost savings there for the efficiencies to be found?
There's cost savings and it speeds up response. But if you go into the wildfire community, they're traditionally not going to be very receptive to people who don't have their training, aren't part of their system. They are very much focused on their safety and working with people they're comfortable with. That is when you have enough resources. When you don't have enough resources, who are you going to call? And, I grew up and I live in the state of Florida, and I'm going to tell you, a lot of our brush fires here, it's a farmer with a tractor and a disc plow out there cutting a fire break.
Right.
So I know that works. I think it's the question of how do we bring this from the one-offs to systemically in the federal government recognizing the public is a resource in a crisis, not a liability, and how do we engage them more effectively?
I agree with you there. I want to turn and build on this subject in our cybersecurity arena. So, of course, speaking of non-traditional partners, we have to think about that in cybersecurity as well. So I'm particularly concerned that the federal government, of course, alone can't secure our critical infrastructure from the evolving, the increasingly complex cyber threats that we have. So to General Botel and then Ms. Rogers, how do you think the federal government can expand the partnerships and information sharing with the companies that possess the cybersecurity knowledge and experience to better protect us all and kind of create that grid, if you will, of security?
Thank you, Senator. So I really like this discussion we're having about the non-traditional partners. This is really, really important. And what the commission recommends here is that we look and organize to make sure that we have a point of contact for businesses in things like the National Response Coordination Center. That they can reach out there to link into them. And I think what we have recognized throughout the pandemic is that while we have a tendency to think about the traditional private sector that we would go out to, in many cases, as you just highlighted, there are parts of the private sector that are not normally considered, but are of course very key to this, and cybersecurity is absolutely essential to this. So I agree with the assessment that you're laying out here, and I think maybe Christy or Mike Capps can add some additional details to this particular area.
Thanks, Senator. I appreciate the question on this. And if I may just add a little bit of context, because my answer will make more sense. Just after 9/11, I was brought into the Department of Transportation to work with New York City's Metropolitan Transit Authority on response. I then went to Department of Defense and was in Iraq working on a contingency operation, then Homeland Security at Customs and Border Protection during SARS and Hurricane Katrina, directly involved. My two companies in which I was CEO after, one was a contingency operation company helping the government emergency response. And the last one was we ran 9 Ebola treatment units in Sierra Leone and Liberia. So I have a different perspective on government response and preparedness. And a unfortunate reoccurring theme in all of those has been the government's inability to reach out and grab non-traditional partners. Because it's not as though the partners that, the private sector, civil society doesn't want to participate and help, they do. One of the things that I will add is in what we call phase 0, in the planning and preparation phase of any crisis, bring in private sector, bring in civil society to help prepare, help respond, so they're not caught off guard. So it's an integrated a systemic response. Furthermore, and we saw this in COVID, so often there are several examples where U.S. manufacturers volunteered to address needs but could not get a go or no-go decision from the government. There wasn't one single authority responsible, and 2, the contracting processes didn't exist. So I would further recommend, and the Commission further recommends, implementing executive emergency purchase orders, issue predefined or indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity federal contracts, or also issue blanket purchase agreements in the time of non-crisis, which means you issue a contract to, let's say, 7 companies you identify. You award a nominal fee annually to those companies just to hold the capacity and capability in times of a crisis.
I think that's very informative, and I'll need IT modernization to do a lot of this. I look forward to talking with you about that too. Thank you. My time's expired.